Hello and good day to all who are listening to this report. Today we'll be reporting about the book of Job. This report is intended for the class of Doc Jose Manuel Espero for his subject Old Testament Law, Prophets, and Writings. So I am tasked to report, to make a report regarding the background and the overview of the book of Job. So, today we will be talking about six things. We have the first one is the purpose of the book, and then the authorship, the major themes, the outline of the book, and the message of the book, and as well as the issues found in the book. So, to continue, going to the first thing that we will be talking about is the uh, purpose of the book. So it is written here that the purpose of the book of Job is to test God's policies concerning justice. The conclusion is God's justice cannot be assessed because we can never have enough information to do so. Instead, his justice must be inferred from his wisdom. So, as we all know, the story of Job in his book found in the Bible, um, there was a great uh, thing that happened to the life of Job, and which can be the cause of writing, or like it became the purpose of why this book was written. It is to show um, God's justice through the life of Job. So the authorship, going to the authorship of the book. Now, this is one of the actually also one of the issues of this book, and so it says the book itself names no author and claims no definite date for its composition. If we see the book of Job, if we read the whole book, we will never see any trace um, or accounts of the author or the writer of this literature, and so there is no definite date as well on when was this written. It is therefore an anonymous work. Rarely has history left such a literary genius unnamed and unknown as to his circumstances or motive from composing such a magnificent work. So, um, as we all know, the books in the Bible were written by inspired writers, authors, inspired who were inspired by the Holy Spirit. And so, despite of having this big question mark regarding the authorship of the Book of Job, since it was there, it is there, and so there is no question to the authenticity of this, since this is inspired by the Holy Spirit. But going forward, so it says here that all that can be learned about the author must be read back from the book. And so it says here he must have suffered excruciatingly, for his empathy for Job is so genuine. So this is one of probably the clues that we can look onto upon identifying the authorship or the author of the book. And and on the second one it says he too may have found insight into his suffering and release from his pain in an encounter with God. The third one is he had been thoroughly trained in the wisdom tradition, as both the theme and the variety of literary devices attest. So the author of this book possibly could have been with Job during his time, or could have witnessed the the suffering of Job during his time. That's why he wrote this book in this way, to also help the readers relate to the suffering of Job, and also to the message that is being conveyed in this book. And on the fourth one, it says here, his experience of suffering must have set him at odds with the teaching of conventional wisdom about absolute patterns of divine retribution. Blessing is always the fruit of righteousness, suffering ever the wage of sin. And the next one is, he was surely an Israelite, as his view of divine sovereignty called for divine justice and impeccable code of ethical behavior intimate. And so there are a lot of um, possible proofs and uh, things that we can actually get from this in identifying who the actual author of the book of Job is. So, to continue on number six, he probably used the non Israelite setting of Uz, whether south in Edom or east in Gilead, both because it was the source of the ancient story and because such suffering is a universal human woe. And on the last one, in good Hebrew fashion, he wanted to share his insight to fortify friends and students against future suffering. In this effort, he joined and expanded the efforts of those who composed um, passages 37, 49, and 73. Now, to sum up, in terms of the authorship of the book, it is still indeed a mystery on who really wrote the book of Job. Maybe through further investigation and research, we could actually find it in the future. Or maybe some of the scholars are actually working about it right now. But for now, this is actually um, um, the details that I've got for this report in terms of the authorship of the book of Job. Now, going to the major themes, the here we can find first one is the retribution principle. So it states here, the retribution principle provides a framework for the philosophical discussion presented in the book of Job. As we all have seen, the principle is stated by means of conditional clauses. So, if a person is righteous, he will prosper. If a person is wicked, he will suffer. So, um, the corollary was deduced from the principle on the assumption that the principle is always true. One could then believe that if a person prospered, he must be righteous, and if a person suffered, he must be wicked. The principle serves as a popular explanation of changes in the daily fortune or misfortune of individuals or nations. So, in the book of Job, everyone assumes that the retribution principle is true. That's how we see it. And the central questions concern the relationship of the principle with the justice of God, particularly calling the corollary into question. So, in the end, the book affirms God's intention of operating by the retribution principle, but implies that we cannot predict how or when it is going to operate. So, it also states here that he delights in prospering the righteous and guarantees that the wicked will be punished. The principle cannot be used, however, to demand action from God or to figure out what a person is really like. It cannot provide consistent explanations for any particular person's prosperity or adversity. It is not intended to address issues of causation. We often cannot know what causes our suffering, but we can take comfort that all is in the hand of an infinitely wise and sovereign God. So, this is one of the major themes in the book of Job. as we all see, as we all have read the the story of Job from the very beginning on how he is actually prospering, and after that, receiving all these challenges that he have faced, he was being he was actually accused of being wicked because of what he is because of what he have underwent, or because of his suffering during that time. And so this is the first major theme that I am showing right now. And for the next one, we have wisdom, justice, and the sovereignty of God. This is very obvious for the book of Job, as if because if you have personally read the whole book and understood it, we could really say to ourselves that this is actually one of the major themes in this book. And so it says here that the divine attributes of wisdom, justice, and sovereignty are emphasized in the book of Job and in the wisdom literature generally. We can appreciate these themes best in comparison to other emphases. So, for instance, in the covenant emphasis of Israelite theology, it is common to see loyalty, compassion, and graciousness mentioned prominently. And so, in this situation, we see the broader categories of God's attributes. Omniscience is only one small and relatively insignificant part of God's infinite wisdom. Omnipotence is likewise only one aspect of God's sovereignty. Similarly, mercy is sometimes a more personalized reflection of God's justice. The broader categories help us focus more on who God is instead of of on what He can do for a particular person. Now, um, I have remembered when I was in IAS just last month. Um, the theme for the theological forum actually is all about um, the justice of God, and one of the stories that was being um, used to for an example on how the justice of God works is the story of Job, and I have understood it really well when um, at the end part of the book of Job, when God showed him how his justice works indirectly. He didn't answer Job directly on what he wants, like on how he wanted his question to be answered. But God showed him his greatness, his wisdom, and his power, on how God great is. He showed it to Job. And so that's how his justice works. And as well, I mean, that's how his justice works as well. It is trusted. We should have faith in it, despite of us having a lot of questions regarding about it, because God Himself knows better than us. And so the third one would be mediator. So the question of whether Job could or would be aided by a mediator, or referred to by a variety of Hebrew terms, arises several times in the book. In chapter 5, verse 1, 9, verse 33, 16, verse 18 to 22, 19, verse 25 to 27, and 33, verse 23. So Job pleads for the intercession of a mediator and appears convinced that such a one will arise, though the exact nature of his expectation is a matter of continuing controversy. So he is an individual. Most would agree that it is God Himself whom Job expects to mediate him, who would serve as a defense attorney in court to afford Job a fair hearing and a just verdict. In the end, no mediator is necessary and none appears. So, if we just focus on these, um, on these written, uh, on these things written here on the screen, we would really, question, probably question God's justice regarding the story of Job. But actually, and it when it says here that he is an individual who would serve as defense attorney, God, whom Job expects in court to afford Job a fair hearing and a just verdict. And in the end, no mediator is necessary and none appears. When we think about this, it would be a little bit unfair, but it actually is. Um, it is not a, um, bad situation for Job not having a mediator during that time, because, as I've said, the justice of God is just, and so it is right. And because, it is right, then there's no mediator needed or necessary for the, um, the things that he have experienced during the time. He wanted to have justice on why he is feeling that way, on why he is experiencing those things, but there is no need for a mediator, because in the end, that is how the justice of God works. It is, for us, maybe a mystery, but for God, um, it's His greatness and His love for us that serves as justice for us. And so, um, going next to the outline, it says here, dissecting the book of Job into its component parts actually may diminish one's understanding of its message. And so it opens with the introduction of Job, closes with the introduction of the three comforters. In the middle, there is a twofold interchange between a scene in heaven and Job's trial on earth. And so here we can see the outline of the study. And there is a dialogue in chapters 3 to 28. On chapter 3, because here the Job's opening lament. And on chapters 4 to 27, it is a dialogue between Job and friends in three cycles. So we can see there their conversations. And Eliphaz, Job replies to each. It says here, Bildad, and Zophar. On these, chapters, ranging from chapter 4 to 27. Now, on, number 3, it says here on chapter 28, that's still included in, the letter A dialogue, the poem of wisdom. There we can find the poem of wisdom in chapter 28. And going to the next part, it says series of speeches from one person on chapters 29 to 41. So the first one on that, under that, series of speeches from one person is Job's avowal of innocence. So, during the time he is, um, stating his reasons, his innocence, trying to prove his innocence. And the second one is the, Elihu's speeches on chapters 32 to 37. And then Yahweh's speeches with Job's response on chapters 38 to 42. So yes, that's the actually the general outline of the book of Job. Um, since this is just an overview for the book of Job, um, we'll not just, dig any further into the very specific details of the outline. We can actually tackle it, sooner, or, for the next time. But for now, this is the general outline of the book of Job. And so the epilogue has two distinct parts, matching the use of pairs in the prologue. And so, going to the message of, the book of Job, it says here that the story is the message. So that's the message. Its parts must not be snatched from the whole, nor its main emphasis hardened into rigid principles or fine tuned into narrow propositions. To do this would violate what the book teaches about the mysteries of God's workings in human lives. So this is the main story. I mean, the main message of this book. It is the story itself. So one of the messages is the freedom of God. So it says here both Job and his friends were utterly baffled by God's freedom. The friends assumed that suffering was always and only the sign of God's retribution, as we have mentioned earlier, that when you are wicked, and so then you will suffer. If you are good, and then you will prosper. So those are the assumption of Job's friend. So Job could imagine no worthy divine purpose to his unmerited suffering. To the bearers of conventional wisdom, the book introduces a God who is free to work his surprises, correct human distortions, and revise the books written about him. God is free to enter into the Satan's test and tell none of the participants about it. He sets the time for his intervention and determines its agenda. God is free not to answer Job's goading questions nor agree with a friend's high sounding doctrines. Above all, he is free to care enough to confront Job, and to forgive the friends. So, um, here it emphasizes the freedom of God. It's not our freedom from Him, or the free will that God has given us, but it actually emphasizes, or the message tells us, that God is free to do whatever He wants. And so we don't have to question Him or anything, because He is the ultimate powerful one. And everything that He does has probably a reason out of His love. Because the Bible really tells us that is the God Himself is love, and so there's no reason for us to question Him, His freedom of being God. And so, to going to the next one, it's the testing of Satan. Then it says here the Satan has access to the presence of Yahweh, yet is governed by his own sovereignty. Satan's absence in the epilogue is a deliberate factor in the book's message. God, not the Satan, is sovereign. The test has been passed. The story points to Job's future, not his past. The Satan is but an interloper of the relationship of God and Job, as depicted in the book's beginning and ending. Now, God Himself knows already, probably, presumably, that Job would really pass this test, as it is mentioned that this is actually a test for Job, because of how Satan sees how Job is just worshiping God because of the goodness that God have shown him. But God Himself is sure that Job would really pass this test. And so it is not just a test for Job, but it is actually a test for Satan as well. And so, not staying very long on that part, let's go to the next part. It's the retribution and justice. So, Job's message reshapes the understanding of the doctrine of divine retribution. The general pattern of just retribution remains operative. Good deeds bring benefits, and bad deeds bring harm. Job's story warns against applying this principle to all individual situations. Since the righteous may suffer and the wicked prosper, it is dangerous to brand a sufferer as a guilty of secret sin, or to praise the prosperous as righteous. Now, it's very nice. Um, this is a very nice point and a message from this book that would help us understand how um, uh, just retribution is still remains operative. Like what I've mentioned earlier, the good deeds brings benefits and bad deeds brings harms. It is still applicable, but sometimes we tend to we tend to use this, or to use this in all the situations that we see. For example, we saw someone who is suffering, and then so we assume that they did something wrong, that's why they suffered. So this story, or the one of the messages in the book of Job, is this, we shouldn't judge anyone who is suffering, that they are guilty of something. It says here. And so this helps us to to learn how to not judge easily. I don't really have the right words to explain, but I know understand this point. And so it's very nice to have this point being told, and we have learned this point as well. And so that's the last one, and now we are on the last part of our overview. I'm sorry, of our overview, and these are the issues. Now there are a lot of issues, but I just want to include just two issues of the book of Job, um, because these are like the major issues. The first one actually is the unity of the book. Now, this talks about the authorship and the date of writing. Since there are a lot of books in the Bible that we know who the author is, or the book itself is the title of the book is actually its own author. Um, uh, Unlike the Pentateuch, which was written by Moses. But there are books in the Bible that were written by that person, which the book was named after. And so the book of Job, if we would think it that way, we would think that Job wrote his this book. But upon searching the scripture and some other researches regarding the book of Job, scholars maybe still haven't found really the author of the book of Job. And so it says here, was the book as we know it written at one time by the same author? So many have questioned the connection between the prologue and epilogue and the rest of the book. The style is narrative rather than the poetry of the rest of the book. And so the language is different and the theology is inconsistent. Further, many believe that the Elihu section, or in the chapter 32 to 37, is a later insertion into an existing book. So a logical conclusion could be that there existed an old story about Job, and that was used by the author of the dialogues and God's speeches. A third stage was the addition of Elihu. So there are a lot of complicated things actually regarding the book of Job. We don't know when was it written. Scholars haven't found out yet. Maybe who wrote the book of Job, and also the unity of the book itself. It conveys a clear message to us. But talking about the historical background and the theological, talking about the historical background of the book, it really is a big question to a lot of people who are trying to understand and to dig deeper regarding the background of this book. And so that's actually one of the biggest issues of the book of Job. And to the last one, it is the permission given to Satan. As we all uh, as we all see, um, the presence of Satan in the prologue raises many questions. There are a lot of people who actually questions this, even until this time. And it says here, this is one of only three appearances in the Old Testament of Satan as a heavenly figure. Why are God and Satan in such a cozy relationship? And why does not God address Satan at the end of the book to taunt him for losing the bet that Job would curse God to his face? So yes, I mentioned this a while ago talking about the messages of the book. And so this is also one of the issues. Um, the permission that was given to Satan to test Job. So it was a big question for some, I mean for many, on why did God allow Satan to test Job, or even this. It says here, why are God and Satan in such a cozy relationship? Now, this is one of the issues that could actually cannot solve. I mean, for in my own perspective, but I don't know for some who are studying thoroughly regarding the scriptures. I hope there is an answer to this in the near future. And so this reached the end of this short overview of the book of Job, and I hope you have learned something today. And like also to say thank you for Pastor Doc Jose Manuel Espero for giving me this opportunity to study the overview of the book of Job and to present this for our class requirements. Thank you, everyone, and God bless you. See you again next time.